Well, good morning and welcome back to the Financial Pulse Radio Show. I'm your host, Danny Howe, CEO of East Coast Tax and Financial Planning. Well, if you're just joining us this morning, we are continuing our conversation that we've had throughout the month, and that is life insurance. And today we're focusing on a particular type of life insurance that provides for also long-term care. And we talked about the fact that long-term care is a huge epidemic right now, and it's only growing. And I feel like within the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to be right there in front of our faces. Like, how are we going to solve this problem? Because let's face it, there's 10,000 baby boomers a day that are retiring. And so with this aging population comes a growing medical expense. And a big part of that medical expense is long-term care. You know, we're living longer. There's medical advancement. There's technology and medications and so forth that are keeping us alive longer. But sometimes we need help. And that's where long-term care comes into play. One out of two of us, statistics say, are going to need some sort of long-term care. And that's just growing. And the average person needs about 3 years. Once they enter into a long-term care facility, the average person is in there for about 3 years. Put that into context, though, you know, you could lay me on a table, put my head in the oven or my feet in the freezer, and that'd be an average, right? But there's one extreme or the other, right? And so with my grandmother, God bless my wife, helping me out with my responsibility, I took care of a third of my grandma, if you want to think about it that way. My aunt and uncle, we all basically traded, took turns. And my father wasn't able to do it, so we took my father's time, and my wife was just unbelievable. But literally, Grandma would go between the three houses because she was diagnosed with dementia and eventually Alzheimer's, for I think 4 years that went on until finally we couldn't do it anymore because it was just too much on all the family members. So then we placed her in a home, and that's where she lived for a couple more years. So a long time, way more than 3 years, that she was taken care of, that the expense was shared and so on and so forth. And we did part of that for Medicaid planning, transferring assets out of estates and so forth, her estate. But I say all that to say it's average of 3 years, but there's one extreme or another. And so how do we plan for this? How do we make sure that it's not crippling on our spouse if you're married, or other family members, or just what your desire is for your estate? Because like we talked about in the last segment, long-term care insurance, long-term care coverage is not there to protect your health. It's there to protect your wealth, because that expense has to come out. And Medicaid will pay for it, but you got to be broke first. So, preparing for long-term care, whether it's being creative with a trust and transferring assets out of your name within the time period that they can't go back. They call it a look back. It's 5-year look back, where they could say, oh, well, you transferred assets out of your name 2 or 3 years ago, so we still have access to that if Medicaid is flipping the bill for long-term care. I'm not an attorney. I had to put that out there, but that's kind of the general understanding of how that sort of thing works. So the alternative is either paying out of pocket and depleting your estate, or selling the house, or, if you're married, spouse gets to live in the house until they pass, but then the house is still up for grabs. So in order to mitigate against that, we have to have some kind of coverage, some kind of insurance to transfer that risk. And last segment, we talked about how a life insurance with a long-term care rider or chronic illness rider can really help mitigate against that without having to pay for insurance that you may never use. That's one of the biggest fears for people when they think about traditional long-term care insurance. Number one, it's super expensive if you're over 60 years old. There's not many policies out there that protect you from rising premiums. So many times people now are canceling long-term care insurance policies because they just can't afford the premiums anymore. But then there's that just dread of like, I don't want to pay for insurance that I don't know if I'll ever use. Maybe you have the mindset, well, my parents were both healthy. They were fine. They never needed any kind of long-term care. But that goes back to the old adage we learn from previous generations of how to do things. And then all of a sudden there's a shift and everybody's like left like, whoa, what do I do? We don't know what to do. We have a whole generation of people now that are retiring and aging, yet haven't planned for this type of situation. So there's going to be a lot of wealth destruction as a result, household wealth destruction as a result of having to liquidate IRAs and 401ks and savings accounts in order to pay for these astronomical, potentially astronomical bills. Again, long-term care costs for a full-time skilled nursing facility is north of $100,000. So here's how this conversation works if you're married and you don't have any kind of coverage or haven't put any plans into place. It's a loving but sad conversation. So here's how it goes. Look, I know I have to go into this. I feel really bad. I don't want to go. I don't want to have this be a financial burden on you. I want you to find the cheapest, stinkiest place. I don't care. I just want you to be able to live out your life without me being a burden. And then the spouse says, no, that's not how it's going to work. I'm going to sell the house and move into a small apartment. I'm going to eat ramen noodles every day for the rest of I don't care what it takes. We're going to buy you the most expensive, best, care facility that we could possibly find because I want you to be comfortable. So it's a very loving conversation on both sides, but it's very sad because there's really no solution. And that's because there was a failure to plan for that situation, And a failing to plan is a plan to fail. And just ignoring it is something that we can't do either. So that's why I really am harping on look at other alternative solutions, whether it's looking at, a creative trust type of situation to transfer some assets and so forth, or whether it's taking a look at this type of policy, a long-term life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. And I want to review how this works again if you're just joining us in the second segment. And basically, it's a permanent life insurance policy. You pay a premium, you pay it monthly, annually, or you can pay it all up front if you have some money maybe sitting around that you're probably not going to really touch or need access right away. You can pay it up. Of course, the more you pay up front, the cheaper the insurance is over the long haul. So that's why you take a look at doing that. But you pay for this insurance as long as the premiums are paid throughout your life. One of two things is going to happen. If you need long-term care, you can use the death benefit of the policy for long-term care. So let's say it's a $250,000 policy, and all of a sudden you find you can't meet two of the 6 daily living activities. Maybe you need help dressing, or maybe you need help bathing, or different things like that, transferring from one room to another and the like. You can actually use a portion or even all of that $250,000 for that long-term care. But let's suppose that you never need it. Or let's suppose you only use a little bit of it. Let's say maybe you only use $30,000 or $40,000 of it. Whatever is left over, or if you haven't used any of it, when you pass, that $250,000 would go to your estate and in tax-free. So it's not like you're throwing premiums away. It's actually still going to your estate for the people that you love, whether it be your spouse, whether it be your children, so on and so forth. There's even policies out there where you can make one lump sum premium deposit. It pays the policy up completely for your whole life. And let's say that there's an event for whatever reason you decide you don't want that policy anymore, and you want that money that you paid into that policy, you can actually just get what's called a return on premium, and you can take that money right back out, no questions asked. It cancels a policy, and you get your money out. So I call it live, die, or quit, right? So I can live, use the money for long-term care if I need it. I can die, and that $250,000, $500,000, whatever the amount is, goes to my estate tax-free, or I can quit. I can take all my money out, no questions asked. If you look at interest rates today and dormant money sitting in CDs and money markets, it could be actually a great alternative for money that's just sitting on the sidelines for you to be able to transfer that risk of long-term care and still have access to your money if you actually needed it or wanted it for whatever reason. Just like every week, we're running out of time. Next week, we're going to talk more about life insurance. Believe it or not, there actually is more to talk about it. And I hope you tune in every single Thursday right here, 10:30 a.m., right here on Waxy Radio. We'll talk to you. Make sure you protect that money, folks. But most importantly, make sure you know who and what you're protecting them from. I'm Danny Howes. Go to eastcoasttaxandfinancial.com. Talk to you soon.